Rebecca Matthews pushed through the doors of Memorial General Hospital, her shoulders heavy after a 12-hour shift in the pediatric ward. Her scrubs bore the faint traces of the day's challenges: a small coffee stain from a hurried lunch break, antiseptic solution from changing an IV, the barely noticeable wrinkles that came from constant movement. "See you tomorrow, Becca," called Nurse Wilson from the front desk. Rebecca waved tiredly, her smile genuine despite her exhaustion. "Tomorrow's my day off, remember? I'll be back on Thursday," she replied, adjusting the strap of her worn messenger bag. 6 years as a pediatric nurse had taught her the value of these small moments, the brief exchanges that connected her to her workplace family, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, and the absolute necessity of her scheduled days off. Her apartment was a 20-minute walk from the hospital, a modest one-bedroom in a neighborhood that was neither fancy nor run down. The route took her through West Side Park, a sprawling green space that served as a natural decompression chamber between her professional and personal lives. It was her daily ritual to walk beneath the towering oaks, listen to the distant laughter of children, and gradually let go of the day's emotional toll. This Wednesday afternoon was perfect. Mild temperature, golden sunlight filtering through the trees, the kind of day that reminded Rebecca why she loved this shortcut home. She recognized the park's regular inhabitants: Mr. Peterson walking his golden retriever by the pond, the young mom with twins who always occupied the same bench near the playground, and several children playing various games on the open grassy area. Among them was a little girl Rebecca often noticed, no more than 5 years old, with blonde pigtails and a distinctive purple ball she loved to play with. The child was always accompanied by a caregiver, usually engrossed in a book, while the girl played nearby. Today was no different as Rebecca strolled along the paved path, mentally planning her day off: laundry, grocery shopping, maybe finally finishing that novel on her nightstand. The familiar rhythm of the park was soothing, until a sudden commotion shattered the tranquility. Rebecca's attention snapped toward a loud, aggressive barking. A large dog, a muscular brown pit bull, was running across the lawn, dragging a broken leash behind it. Its owner was sprinting after it, shouting commands that went completely ignored. Rebecca froze when she realized the dog was headed straight for the playground area. Parents were grabbing their children, teenagers were backing away, but the little girl with the purple ball stood motionless in the open field, directly in the dog's path. The caregiver was too far away, scrambling from the bench with a look of absolute terror. Time seemed to slow as Rebecca processed the scene unfolding before her. The distance between the charging dog and the paralyzed child was shrinking rapidly. The animal's focus was locked on the small, motionless figure, its bark becoming a deep, menacing growl. The logical part of Rebecca's brain, the trained healthcare professional, recognized the imminent danger. The pit bull showed clear signs of aggression. Ears forward, teeth bared, body tense and low to the ground. Yet it wasn't her professional training that propelled her forward. It was something more primal, more instinctual, a fundamental human response to protect a child in danger. Without conscious thought, Rebecca dropped her bag and ran. "Get back!" Someone shouted as Rebecca sprinted across the grass, but the warning barely registered in her mind. Her focus had narrowed to a single objective: reach the child before the dog did. The pit bull was now 20 yards away from the little girl, who remained frozen in terror. The purple ball clutched tightly against her chest. The dog's owner, a young man in a red t-shirt, was still running after his pet, his face contorted with panic as he realized what was about to happen. Rebecca ran faster than she'd ever run before, her nurse's sneakers pounding against the grass. The distance between her and the child closed rapidly, but the dog was closing in too, its powerful legs carrying it with frightening speed. "Sweetie, don't move," Rebecca called out, though she doubted the terrified child could process instructions. 10 more strides and she reached the little girl, sweeping her into her arms in one fluid motion. In the same instant, she pivoted, placing her own body between the child and the oncoming animal. The impact came a heartbeat later. The pit bull launched itself at them, and Rebecca felt a searing pain as the dog's teeth clamped down on her calf. She screamed but maintained her protective hold on the child, dropping to her knees while keeping the girl elevated against her chest, away from the animal. "Help!" she cried out, struggling to keep her balance as the dog maintained its grip. The pain was blinding, white-hot and pulsing through her entire leg. She could feel warm wetness spreading through her scrub pants, knowing it was her own blood soaking the fabric. The dog's owner reached them seconds later, along with another man who had been jogging nearby. Together they struggled with the animal, the owner grabbing the broken leash while the jogger tried to pry the dog's jaws open. "Get it off her!" someone shouted from the gathering crowd. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, the dog released its hold. The owner managed to secure it, wrestling the still barking animal to the ground while the jogger pulled it away. Rebecca collapsed onto the grass, the adrenaline that had propelled her now giving way to shock and pain. She was still cradling the little girl, who had begun to sob against her chest. "You're okay," Rebecca whispered, her voice strained through gritted teeth. "You're safe now." A man in an expensive-looking suit rushed toward them, his face drained of color. "Lily! Oh my God, Lily!" The little girl turned at the sound of the voice. "Daddy." The man dropped to his knees beside them, gently taking the child from Rebecca's arms. "Are you hurt, princess? Are you okay?" The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face as she clung to her father. Only then did he seem to fully register Rebecca, who was now lying on her side, clutching her bleeding leg. "You saved my daughter," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." Rebecca tried to respond but could only manage a weak nod. The pain was becoming overwhelming, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She was vaguely aware of commotion around her, someone calling 911, the dog owner profusely apologizing, people taking videos with their phones. The well-dressed man shifted his attention between his daughter and Rebecca. After confirming his child was physically unharmed, he turned his full focus to the injured nurse. "Don't move," he instructed, removing his suit jacket and placing it gently under her head. "Help is coming. What's your name?" "Rebecca," she managed to whisper. "Rebecca Matthews." "I'm David Wilson," he replied, taking her hand with surprising gentleness. "And you just saved my daughter's life." The paramedics arrived within minutes, their efficiency a stark contrast to the chaos of the scene. Rebecca was quickly stabilized, her leg temporarily bandaged, and oxygen administered to counter the effects of shock. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, she drifted in and out of awareness, the pain medication beginning to dull the senses. "I'm coming with you," she heard David Wilson say to the paramedics, his tone leaving no room for argument. Through the haze, Rebecca noticed a woman had arrived, likely Lily's nanny, who now held the still trembling child. "Take care of Lily," David instructed the woman. "I'll call you from the hospital." Then he climbed into the ambulance and took a seat beside Rebecca. During the short ride to Memorial General, the very hospital she had left less than an hour before, Rebecca noticed David making several phone calls, his voice low but commanding. The words "best care" and "whatever it costs" filtered through her consciousness. The emergency room erupted into activity when they recognized one of their own on the stretcher. Dr. Harrison, the chief of emergency medicine, appeared immediately. "Rebecca, what happened?" he demanded, already examining her wound. A nurse quickly explained the situation while David stood nearby, still on his phone, but watching the proceedings intensely. Rebecca was whisked away for x-rays, blood work, and wound assessment, the hospital staff treating her with a special care reserved for one of their own. The dog's bite had been severe, tearing through muscle and coming dangerously close to her artery. The wound would require surgical repair, a course of strong antibiotics, and likely physical therapy afterward. As the medical team prepared her for surgery, Rebecca caught glimpses of David Wilson in the hallway, engaged in what appeared to be serious conversations with hospital administrators. When she awoke in the recovery room hours later, groggy from anesthesia, she was surprised to find herself in a private suite rather than the standard recovery ward. The room was spacious, with a window overlooking the city skyline, fresh flowers on the side table, and amenities that certainly weren't standard hospital issue. "You're awake," came a voice from the doorway. David Wilson stood there, having changed from his ruined suit into casual, but clearly expensive attire. He approached her bedside, his expression a mixture of concern and profound gratitude. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I've been bitten by a dog," Rebecca replied with a weak smile. "How's Lily?" "She's fine. Physically, at least. A bit shaken up, but children are resilient." He paused, studying her face. "The doctors say you'll need several weeks of recovery, possibly longer before you can return to work." Rebecca's heart sank. Several weeks without income would be devastating. Her nurse's salary covered her modest lifestyle, but she had little savings to speak of, and her student loans from nursing school still loomed large. As if reading her thoughts, David continued, "I've taken the liberty of making some arrangements. Your medical expenses are covered, of course, and I've established a fund to replace your lost wages during recovery." "That's not necessary," Rebecca began, uncomfortable with the idea of charity. "It's the least I can do," they had insisted. "You put yourself in danger to save my daughter. There's no way to adequately repay that kind of courage." Before she could protest further, the door opened again, and a hospital administrator entered, accompanied by a distinguished-looking physician Rebecca didn't recognize. "Ms. Matthews, this is Dr. Levine, one of the top orthopedic specialists in the country," the administrator said. "Mr. Wilson has arranged for him to oversee your care." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of tests, consultations, and increasing awareness that David Wilson was not an ordinary father. The hospital staff treated him with deference that suggested importance beyond mere wealth. Nurses whispered in the hallway, and Rebecca caught fragments about Wilson Industries and half the city's development. By the second day, flowers and gifts had begun arriving, not just from her colleagues, but from strangers who had seen the viral video of her rescue. Local news outlets requested interviews, and social media had dubbed her the guardian angel nurse. The hospital assigned a staff member just to manage the growing attention. When David visited again, he brought an elegant leather portfolio. "Rebecca, there's something we need to discuss," he said, sitting beside her bed. "Your act of bravery has captured public attention. I've had my team prepare a statement for the press. It would be helpful if we could coordinate our response." Rebecca felt a growing unease. Everything was moving too fast. The special treatment, the media attention, and now this sense that her story was somehow being managed. "I don't understand," she said cautiously. "Why do we need to coordinate anything? It was just instinct. Anyone would have done the same." David's expression softened slightly. "Not anyone, Rebecca. What you did was extraordinary." He opened the portfolio and removed some papers. "I've also taken the liberty of having my legal team draw up an agreement. It's nothing complicated, just ensures that your needs are taken care of while providing some structure to how we handle the public interest in this situation." As Rebecca scanned the document, her unease deepened. Between the legal jargon, she discerned clauses about approved statements, media appearances, and something about mutual representation of events. It looked suspiciously like she was being asked to let David's team control the narrative. "I'm not sure I'm comfortable signing this," she said, handing the papers back. David's demeanor changed subtly, a slight tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible straightening of his posture. "It's really in everyone's best interest, including yours. My team is experienced in handling media situations. They can protect you from unwanted intrusion." "I appreciate that, but I think I can manage," Rebecca replied, her nurse's instinct for quiet assertion coming to the fore. David didn't press further, but as he left, he placed a business card on her nightstand. "My personal number. Please call if you need anything at all." After he departed, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made her stomach drop. "Billionaire developer's daughter saved by heroic nurse. Wilson credits guardian angel with miraculous rescue." The story had already been shaped, and she hadn't even been consulted. 3 days after the incident, Rebecca was discharged from the hospital with instructions for wound care, a prescription for antibiotics and pain medication, and an appointment schedule for physical therapy. Despite her protests, David Wilson had arranged for a private medical transport to take her home. When she arrived at her apartment building, she was startled to find a security guard stationed in the lobby, a new addition in the previously unguarded building. "Ms. Matthews," the guard acknowledged with a nod. "Mr. Wilson arranged for security during your recovery." Rebecca felt a complex mixture of gratitude and discomfort. The protective measures were thoughtful, but felt intrusive. Decisions made about her life without her input. Inside her apartment, she found it had been professionally cleaned. Fresh groceries filled her refrigerator, and a new ergonomic lounger had been added to her living room, positioned perfectly for elevating her injured leg. On her kitchen counter sat a sleek new laptop with a note: "For your convenience during recovery." DW, Rebecca sank into her familiar couch instead of the new lounger, suddenly overwhelmed. The events of the past few days crashed over her like a wave. The attack, the surgery, the media attention, and now these gifts that felt more like an encroachment on her independence. Her phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from friends, colleagues, and increasingly, unknown numbers. Journalists seeking interviews, well-wishers who had somehow obtained her contact information, and even a few dubious messages from people claiming to represent various causes. She scrolled through her missed calls and found several from her supervisor at the hospital. When she returned the call, the conversation left her even more unsettled. "Rebecca, I'm just checking in on your recovery," the supervisor began, her tone oddly formal. "Thanks, Maria. I'm home now, following doctor's orders." Good. There was an awkward pause. "Listen, there's something you should know. Mr. Wilson has made a substantial donation to the pediatric ward, contingent on some, arrangements regarding your return." Rebecca sat up straighter, ignoring the pain in her leg. "What kind of arrangements?" "He suggested creating a special position for you, a kind of community liaison role. Higher pay, fewer clinical hours, more public-facing responsibilities." Maria's voice became hushed. "Rebecca, this donation could fund our new pediatric wing. The board is very interested in making this work." The implication was clear. Her job was being redesigned without her input, leveraged against a donation that would benefit many but effectively remove her from the hands-on nursing work she loved. "I need to think about this," Rebecca said carefully. "Of course," Maria replied, too quickly. "Take your time." "Well, at least until next week when the board meets." After hanging up, Rebecca opened her laptop to check her email, and was shocked to discover an entirely new inbox had been set up. One that had apparently been filtering messages on her behalf. There were folders labeled Media Requests, Approved, Media Requests, Pending Review, and Scheduled Appearances. She clicked through in disbelief, finding that someone, presumably from David's team, had already committed her to several interviews and a local charity event once she was sufficiently recovered. Her doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. When she hobbled to answer it, she found a courier with a package requiring her signature. Inside was an elegant cream-colored envelope containing a handwritten note from David Wilson and a check that made her gasp. $500,000, made out to her name. The note read, "Rebecca, please accept this as a token of my gratitude. No amount could ever truly compensate for what you did, but I hope this will make your recovery more comfortable and open new possibilities for your future. Lily asks about you daily and would love to see you when you're feeling better. David. The check trembled in her hand. It was an astronomical sum, enough to pay off her student loans, buy a home instead of renting, create a financial cushion she'd never dreamed possible. But it felt wrong, like a transaction, a way of putting a price tag on what had been a purely human act. Rebecca placed the check on her coffee table and sat staring at it, her mind racing. Everything about this situation was spiraling beyond her control. The media was crafting a narrative about her, her workplace was rearranging her career, and now this check that felt both like a blessing and a bribe. Her phone rang again, an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Rebecca Matthews, asked a professional female voice. Yes, she replied cautiously. This is Amanda Parker from Wilson Industries PR department. I'm calling to confirm your appearance at the Children's Hospital Gala next month. Mr. Wilson will be receiving a humanitarian award and has requested you join him on stage for the presentation. Rebecca's patience finally snapped. I never agreed to that. In fact, I haven't agreed to any of these appearances or interviews or changes to my job. There was a startled pause. I am sorry, Ms. Matthews. My understanding was that these arrangements had been approved. Mr. Wilson was quite specific. Mr. Wilson doesn't get to decide how I live my life or tell my story, Rebecca interrupted, her voice rising. Please cancel any commitments made in my name without my explicit consent. She ended the call and sat in the sudden silence of her apartment, her heart pounding. She had just potentially antagonized one of the most powerful men in the city, a man who had been nothing but generous, if overwhelmingly so. But beneath that generosity was an assumption that her life was now his to direct, her story his to control. Rebecca looked again at the check on her table, then at the new laptop, the stocked refrigerator, the security guard undoubtedly still stationed downstairs. What had begun as a simple act of human compassion had somehow transformed into a gilded cage. She reached for her phone and scrolled to a contact, the college roommate who had become a lawyer. It was time to understand her rights and reclaim her narrative. He can't actually do that, said Megan Fisher, her voice clear through the phone speaker. Rebecca's former roommate had transitioned from promising law student to respected civil rights attorney over the past decade. You didn't sign anything, right? No, Rebecca confirmed, glancing at the unsigned agreements still sitting on her coffee table. But there's already so much in motion. The security guard, the PR team making commitments for me, even talks about changing my position at the hospital. Without your written consent, none of that is binding, Megan assured her. Though the hospital situation is trickier if they're restructuring positions. That might technically be within their rights as your employer. Rebecca rubbed her temples, feeling a headache forming. What should I do? Document everything, Megan advised. Every call, every gift, every decision made without consulting you. Forward me those emails showing appearances scheduled without your permission. And Rebecca, don't cash that check. Not until we're clear about any implicit strings attached. Over the next few days, Rebecca followed Megan's advice meticulously. She created a detailed log of everything that had happened since the incident, including timestamps of calls and visitors. She politely but firmly declined all interview requests and informed the hospital administration that she would not be making any decisions about her position until she was medically cleared to return to work. The security guard disappeared from her lobby on the third day, whether because she had asked the building manager to deny him entry or because David had recalled him, she wasn't sure. A week into her recovery, Rebecca received a text message directly from David Wilson. Is everything all right? My team tells me you declined the arranged interviews. If there's an issue, I'd like to help resolve it. Rebecca stared at the message for a long time before crafting a careful response. Mr. Wilson, I appreciate your concern and generosity. However, I need to handle my recovery, and the attention from the incident in my own way. I hope you can respect that." His reply came almost immediately. "Of course. Perhaps we could discuss in person. Lily has been asking about you." The mention of Lily tugged at Rebecca's heart. The little girl was innocent in all this. A child who had been terrified and then saved. Rebecca couldn't bring herself to refuse completely. "I'd be happy to see Lily," she texted back. "Perhaps a short visit when I'm feeling a bit stronger." 3 days later, against Megan's cautionary advice, Rebecca agreed to meet David and Lily at a small cafe near her apartment. She arrived early, choosing a table with a clear view of both entrances. A small assertion of control in a situation where she felt increasingly powerless. David arrived precisely on time, holding Lily's hand. The little girl's face lit up when she saw Rebecca, and she rushed forward, stopping just short of hugging her when David gently reminded her about Rebecca's injury. "I drew you a picture," Lily said shyly, presenting a crayon drawing of what appeared to be Rebecca in nurse's scrubs with a red cape flowing behind her. "It's beautiful," Rebecca said sincerely, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Lily." While Lily enjoyed a hot chocolate, David broached the subject Rebecca knew was inevitable. "I sense there's been some misunderstanding," he began, his voice low enough not to carry to neighboring tables. "My intentions were only to help, to show gratitude for what you did." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "I understand that, and I'm grateful. But Mr. Wilson." "David, please." "David," she conceded. "The thing is, what happened in the park was instinct. I didn't do it for recognition or reward. And since then, I felt like my life is being managed. Decisions are being made about my future without my input." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "That was never my intention. I'd only wanted to ensure you had everything you needed. What I need is to maintain my autonomy," Rebecca said firmly. "To make my own choices about my recovery, my career, and how I engage with the attention this incident has brought." David studied her for a moment, as if seeing her properly for the first time. Not just as the woman who had saved his daughter, but as a person with her own agency and boundaries. "I'm used to solving problems efficiently," he admitted finally. "In my world, resources and connections can smooth most paths. I applied that same approach here without considering you might want something different." It was an acknowledgement, if not quite an apology. Rebecca decided to press her advantage. "The donation to the pediatric ward, is it truly contingent on my taking a new position?" David had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Not explicitly, no. I suggested the position because I thought it would benefit both you and the hospital. The donation is separate, though I did express interest in it supporting your work." Rebecca nodded, processing this information. "And the PR appearances, the media schedule. My team was overzealous," he admitted. "They're accustomed to managing public narratives proactively. I should have consulted you first." As the conversation continued, with Lily happily drawing more pictures beside them, Rebecca began to sense something shifting. David Wilson was a man accustomed to power and deference, to shaping the world according to his vision. But he was also a father who had nearly lost his daughter, a human being capable of recognizing when his approach had missed the mark. When they parted, David promised to have his team stand down from any further planning on her behalf. Rebecca, in turn, agreed to consider the check as a no-strings-attached gift, though she remained uncertain whether she would accept it. That evening, she received an email from her supervisor at the hospital. The proposed position had been withdrawn, with assurances that her original role would be waiting whenever she was medically cleared to return. The Wilson donation to the pediatric ward, she was informed, would proceed regardless. It was a small victory, but a significant one. Rebecca had held her ground against one of the most powerful influences in the city and emerged with her autonomy intact. The next morning, she woke to breaking news. A full-page advertisement in the city's major newspaper, signed by David Wilson, praising the dedicated healthcare workers at Memorial General Hospital and announcing the creation of a fund to support nurses and first responders injured in the line of duty. Her name was mentioned only once as the inspiration for the initiative, with no photos and no personal details. It was exactly the kind of recognition she could accept, one that shifted the focus from her specific act to the broader community of caregivers who risked themselves daily without expectation of reward or recognition. Perhaps, Rebecca thought, as she read the announcement, there was a path forward that honored both her need for independence and the genuine gratitude David wanted to express. 2 weeks into her recovery, Rebecca was progressing well. The surgical wound was healing properly, and she had graduated from wheelchair to crutches for short distances around her apartment. Physical therapy was painful but productive, and her therapist was cautiously optimistic about a full recovery. What wasn't healing was the public's fascination with her story. Despite her refusal to give interviews, media outlets continued to run pieces about the guardian angel nurse, often recycling the same footage and sparse facts, while filling in the gaps with speculation. One morning, while scrolling through local news, Rebecca was startled to find an article that went beyond mere speculation. Under the headline, "Hero Nurse's Troubled Past," the story behind the headlines. The piece contained personal details about her that could only have come from someone with access to private records. Her struggle with student loans, a brief period of depression during nursing school, and even a reference to her parents' difficult divorce when she was a teenager. The article stopped short of being explicitly negative, framing these elements as challenges overcome through resilience. But the invasion of privacy was shocking. More alarming was the implication that these details somehow contextualized her act of courage, as if saving a child required explanation beyond basic human decency. Rebecca immediately called Megan, who was equally disturbed by the article. "This is crossing several lines," the attorney said grimly. "These are private details that shouldn't be public knowledge. We need to find out how they got this information." As they talked through possibilities, Rebecca's phone lit up with another call, David Wilson. She hesitated before answering. "Rebecca, have you seen the article?" he asked without preamble. "I have," she replied cautiously. "I want to assure you, this didn't come from me or my team," David said, his voice tight with what sounded like genuine anger. "In fact, I've already had my legal department contact the publication with a demand for retraction and source disclosure." Rebecca was surprised by his reaction. "Thank you, but why would you do that?" "Because this isn't right," he replied simply. "Whatever our differences in approach, invading your privacy isn't acceptable. Besides, I suspect this might be related to Gerald Thornton." "Who?" "A competitor of mine in development. We've been bidding against each other for the Riverside project, a major redevelopment contract worth billions. The timing of this article, just days before the City Council's final vote, seems convenient." Rebecca struggled to connect the dots. "How does an article about me affect your business deal?" David sighed heavily. "It's complicated, but essentially, my company's public image is a factor in the selection process. The hero's daughter saved by working-class nurse narrative has generated significant positive publicity for me personally. Thornton might be trying to tarnish that by suggesting I'm exploiting your story for gain." The realization that her private life was being weaponized in a corporate battle made Rebecca feel physically ill. "This has gone too far," she said quietly. "I agree," David replied. "Which is why I wanted to suggest something. What if we address this together, not through more media, that would only fuel the fire, but through direct action?" "What kind of action?" "I have information that Thornton's company has been cutting corners on safety regulations at their construction sites. Workers have been injured, incidents covered up. If we could connect with some of those workers, bring their stories to light alongside the foundation I've established in your honor." Rebecca interrupted him. "Stop. Just stop. This isn't about your corporate rivalry or foundations in my honor. This is about my life being turned into a public spectacle without my consent." There was a pause before David spoke again, his tone noticeably cooler. I understand your frustration, but I'm trying to help. Thornton is ruthless. If he's targeting you to get to me, things could get worse before they get better. Then perhaps you should distance yourself from me and my story, Rebecca suggested, an edge entering her voice. Make it clear to Mr. Thornton that I'm not a chess piece in whatever game you two are playing. The conversation ended shortly afterward, with David promising to respect her wishes while reiterating his concern for her well-being. Rebecca wasn't sure whether to believe his expressions of concern or to see them as another attempt to maintain control of the narrative, and by extension her. The next day brought another unwelcome surprise. A formal letter arrived from Memorial General Hospital, informing her that due to recent media attention and concerns about disruption to hospital operations, her return to work would be contingent upon a review by the hospital board. They cited concerns about patient privacy and the potential for continued media presence to interfere with the hospital's primary mission of patient care. It was a bureaucratic way of saying they were reconsidering her employment because she had become a liability. The same hospital that had celebrated her as one of their own was now holding her at arm's length, afraid of the controversies swirling around her. Rebecca showed the letter to Megan, who immediately recognized it for what it was. "This has Wilson written all over it," she said grimly. "They were falling over themselves to accommodate him when he was promising donations tied to your special position. Now that you've refused to play along, suddenly you're a disruption." But he seemed genuinely concerned about the article, Rebecca protested. He even said he was taking legal action against the publication. Megan gave her a sympathetic but knowing look. People like David Wilson operate on multiple levels. He might genuinely admire what you did and still be willing to apply pressure when you don't conform to his expectations. This letter is almost certainly the result of a conversation between Wilson and someone on the hospital board. The realization that her job, her vocation, the work she had dedicated her life to, was now in jeopardy because of political games being played at levels far above her hit Rebecca hard. She had saved the child because it was the right thing to do, the human thing to do. Now that simple act of compassion had somehow transformed into a complex web of power plays, public relations, and corporate maneuvering. Rebecca sat at her kitchen table, the hospital letter before her, and made a decision. If her story was going to be told, if her life was going to be dissected, and her career leveraged as a bargaining chip, then she would be the one to control the narrative. Not David Wilson, not Gerald Thornton, not the media, and certainly not the hospital administrators who were more concerned with donations than with the well-being of their staff. She picked up her phone and called a number she had previously ignored. A journalist who had reached out repeatedly, but respectfully, never pushing when Rebecca declined to comment. "Miss Torres? This is Rebecca Matthews. I think I'm ready to tell my story now. The real story." The hospital boardroom was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. 12 people sat around the polished mahogany table, 10 board members, the hospital's legal counsel, and Rebecca. Her crutches leaned against the wall behind her chair, a visible reminder of why they were all gathered. "Ms. Matthews," began Dr. Eleanor Jenkins, the board chairperson, "we've called this special meeting to discuss the situation that has developed. Before we proceed, is there anything you'd like to say?" Rebecca took a deep breath, centering herself. "Yes, actually. I'd like to know specifically what policy I've violated that has put my position at risk." Dr. Jenkins exchanged glances with the legal counsel. "It's not a matter of policy violation per se. It's about the disruption caused by the ongoing media attention and the potential impact on hospital operations." "Interesting," Rebecca replied calmly, "because I've reviewed the hospital's employee handbook thoroughly, and there's nothing in it about employees becoming newsworthy. There is, however, quite a bit about protections for employees who are injured while rendering aid, even when off duty." She placed a folder on the table. "I'd also brought something I think the board should see before making any decisions." The hospital's legal counsel reached for the folder, But Rebecca kept her hand firmly on it. Actually, this isn't just for legal review. I'd like all board members to see it. After a moment's hesitation, Dr. Jenkins nodded, and Rebecca distributed copies of a document to everyone present. It was the exposé she had worked on with journalist Elena Torres. Not yet published, but fully prepared. The headline read, "The Price of Heroism: How a Nurse Saved a Child and Lost Her Job." As the board members read, their expressions shifted from confusion to concern, and in some cases, to outright alarm. The article detailed not only Rebecca's act of heroism and subsequent treatment, but also highlighted communications between the hospital board and David Wilson's office. Communications that suggested the billionaire's influence had played a significant role in both the special treatment Rebecca initially received and the subsequent threat to her employment. "Where did you get these emails?" the legal counsel asked, his voice carefully controlled. "That's not relevant to our discussion," Rebecca replied. "What matters is their content, which several board members here can verify as authentic." She turned to Dr. Jenkins. "The article also includes statements from 3 nurses and 2 doctors who were present during my treatment, all describing the unusual level of administrative interference in what should have been purely medical decisions. It details how my role was to be restructured without my input as part of a quid pro quo arrangement with Mr. Wilson." Rebecca paused, allowing her words to sink in. "Ms. Torres has agreed to hold publication for 48 hours, giving this board an opportunity to correct its course. I'm not interested in damaging this institution. I've dedicated my career to it. But I will not be silenced or pushed out because I've become inconvenient to people with power." The tension in the room was palpable. Several board members whispered urgently to each other, while others stared at the documents before them with expressions of resignation. "There's more," Rebecca continued. "After consulting with legal counsel, I've prepared a formal complaint alleging workplace retaliation and wrongful termination threats. My attorney believes we have grounds for both a civil suit and potentially an investigation by the State Nursing Board into administrative practices here that put donor relations above staff well-being." She leaned forward slightly. "That's not what I want. What I want is to return to my job as a pediatric nurse. The job I've trained for, the job I love, without interference or special treatment. I want the narrative around what happened in that park to be about human compassion, not about power plays and public relations. And I want written assurance that my employment status will be based solely on my professional performance, not on who I've helped or who's taken an interest in my story." The room fell silent again as the board members absorbed her words. The hospital's legal counsel was scribbling notes furiously, occasionally shaking his head. Finally, Dr. Jenkins spoke. "We'll need to discuss this privately, Ms. Matthews. Would you mind stepping outside for a few minutes?" Rebecca gathered her crutches and stood. "Of course, take all the time you need." In the hallway outside the boardroom, Rebecca leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The confidence she had projected inside was genuine, but had taken every ounce of her strength to maintain. She checked her phone and found 3 missed calls from David Wilson. Before she could decide whether to return them, the boardroom door opened, and Dr. Jenkins gestured for her to come back inside. "Ms. Matthews," the chairperson began once Rebecca was seated, "the board has reached a decision. We will be rescinding the letter regarding your employment status. Your position as a pediatric nurse remains secure, to be resumed once you're medically cleared." Rebecca nodded, keeping her expression neutral despite the relief flooding through her. "Additionally," Dr. Jenkins continued, "we will be establishing a formal policy regarding media attention involving staff members, ensuring that all employees receive consistent support regardless of the circumstances that brought them into the public eye." "Thank you," Rebecca said simply. As the meeting concluded and board members filtered out, Dr. Jenkins approached Rebecca privately. "That was quite a strategy," she said quietly. "Risky, but effective. Sometimes standing your ground is the only option," Rebecca replied. For what it's worth, the older woman added, I oppose the pressure being placed on you from the beginning. Medicine should never be about politics or public relations. Rebecca smiled faintly. I'm glad to hear that. As she made her way out of the hospital, Rebecca checked her phone again. The missed calls from David Wilson now numbered 5, along with several text messages asking her to contact him urgently. She hesitated, then dialed his number. He answered immediately. Rebecca, we need to talk. I've just heard from the hospital board. Yes, she interrupted. I was in that meeting. This has gone too far, David said, his voice tense. That article you're planning with Torres, it could damage a lot of people, including yourself. The article isn't about damaging anyone, Rebecca replied calmly as she navigated through the hospital lobby. It's about the truth, about what happens when people try to control others' stories for their own purposes. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with, David warned. Thornton isn't just going to back down. If this goes public, he'll, Mr. Wilson, Rebecca interjected, reaching the hospital exit. This isn't about your rival or your development deal. It never was. It's about my life, my career, and my right to determine how my own story is told. She pushed through the revolving door and emerged into the bright afternoon sunlight. Across the street, she spotted Elena Torres waiting by a bench as planned. I need to go, she told David. The hospital has already agreed to my terms. The article won't be necessary if everyone else follows suit. What terms? David asked, his businessman's instincts clearly engaged despite his agitation. Simple ones, Rebecca answered. I return to my normal life. The media circus around me stops. No special positions, no public appearances, no manipulated narratives. Just a nurse who did what any decent human being would do, allowed to continue doing her job. There was a long pause before David spoke again. And what about the foundation? The Fund for Injured Healthcare Workers. Those are worthy causes, Rebecca acknowledged. If you want to support them, do it because they matter, not because they're connected to me or my story. Another pause, longer this time. When David finally responded, his voice had lost its edge of urgency. You're an extraordinary person, Rebecca Matthews. Not just for what you did for Lily, but for who you are. I'm really not, she said with a small smile. That's been my point all along. As she ended the call and crossed the street toward Elena, Rebecca felt a weight lifting. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Her recovery would take months, and the public's memory would take longer to fade. But she had reclaimed control of her own narrative. Not through power or money or influence, but through the simple, unwavering insistence on her own truth. Elena stood as Rebecca approached. How did it go? The hospital backed down, Rebecca replied, and I think Mr. Wilson is starting to understand. The journalist studied her thoughtfully. So we're holding the article. Rebecca nodded. For now. Let's give everyone a chance to do the right thing. As they walked together toward a nearby cafe, Rebecca glanced back at the hospital where she had worked for years and would soon return. In a strange way, the entire ordeal had reinforced why she had become a nurse in the first place. Not for recognition or reward, but because helping others was simply the right thing to do. And sometimes, she reflected, the greatest act of courage isn't running toward danger, but standing firmly in your truth when powerful forces try to reshape it. 6 months had passed since that fateful day in the park. Rebecca stood by the nurse's station in the pediatric ward, reviewing a patient's chart on a tablet. Her leg had healed well, though physical therapy would continue for several more months. The slight limp that remained was barely noticeable to anyone but her. Nurse Matthews, room 412 is asking for you, said the unit secretary with a smile. Someone's excited about going home today. Rebecca nodded, setting the tablet down. Thanks, Diane. I'll head there now. As she walked down the familiar corridor, she reflected on how much had changed, and how much had stayed wonderfully the same. Her return to work 3 months ago had been met with warm welcomes from colleagues who treated her normally, not as the media sensation she had briefly been. The hospital administration had honored their agreement, allowing her to resume her regular duties without fanfare or special treatment. The media attention had eventually subsided, as all news cycles do. The unpublished exposé had remained just that, unpublished. Elena Torres had respected Rebecca's decision to withhold it once the hospital and David Wilson had backed down from their attempts to control her narrative. The journalist had instead written a thoughtful piece about medical professionals and the daily heroism that rarely makes headlines, mentioning Rebecca's story only briefly as context. Room 412 contained a 10-year-old boy named Marcus who had been admitted with pneumonia 5 days earlier. He was sitting up in bed now, dressed in street clothes rather than a hospital gown, his mother packing his belongings into a duffel bag. "Nurse Becker," he exclaimed when she entered. "Mom says we can go home today." "That's right," Rebecca confirmed with a smile. "Dr. Patterson has signed your discharge papers. How are you feeling?" "Way better," he declared proudly. "And Mom says I can have ice cream when we get home." "You've definitely earned it," Rebecca told him, checking his chart one last time before going through the discharge instructions with his mother. As she finished up and prepared to leave the room, Marcus called after her. "Nurse Becker, my friend told me you're the lady who saved that little girl from the dog. Is that true?" Rebecca paused, something warming in her chest. Once, such a question would have filled her with dread, a reminder of the chaos that had followed her act of instinct. Now, it was simply a question she could answer honestly. "Yes, that was me," she said quietly. "That's so cool," Marcus said, his eyes wide. "I want to be brave like that someday." Rebecca approached his bedside once more. "You already are brave, Marcus. You fought pneumonia like a champion, didn't you? And you didn't even complain about the gross medicine." He grinned at that, and Rebecca continued, "Bravery isn't just about big, dramatic moments. It's about facing whatever challenges come your way, one day at a time." Marcus seemed to consider this seriously before nodding. "I like that." As Rebecca left the room, she felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, helping patients, offering comfort, doing the everyday work that had called her to nursing in the first place. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a text from David Wilson. "Lily's ballet recital is this Saturday. She'd love it if you could come. No press, no attention, just friends. Let me know." Over the past months, an unexpected friendship had developed between Rebecca and the Wilson family. After the confrontation with the hospital board and David's eventual acceptance of Rebecca's terms, tensions had gradually eased. Lily had continued to ask about her nurse, and Rebecca had found herself unable to deny the child's innocent desire to maintain connection. Their friendship was kept deliberately private. David had respected Rebecca's wish to stay out of the spotlight, arranging their occasional meetings away from public eyes and media attention. Rebecca had come to appreciate his company on its own merits, discovering that beneath the powerful businessman exterior was a devoted father still shaken by how close he had come to losing his daughter. Rebecca texted back, "Wouldn't miss it. Text me the details." As her shift ended that evening, Rebecca took her usual route home through West Side Park. She no longer feared the path that had changed her life. In fact, she had reclaimed it as her own, refusing to let one incident redefine a place that had brought her peace for years. The park was quiet in the early evening, with only a few joggers and dog walkers passing by. Rebecca paused at a particular spot on the grass, the place where she had thrown herself between a child and danger without hesitation. There was nothing to mark it, nothing to suggest its significance. To anyone else, it was just another patch of green in a city park. As she stood there, a voice called out behind her, "Ms. Matthews." Rebecca turned to find a woman in her 30s, holding the hand of a young boy about 7 years old. "Yes," Rebecca replied, not recognizing them. The woman approached hesitantly. I'm sorry to bother you. I wasn't sure it was you at first. I'm Andrea Morales. This is my son, Tyler. Rebecca smiled politely, still confused. We saw what happened that day, Andrea explained. We were here in the park when you saved that little girl from the dog. Tyler has talked about it ever since. The boy looked up at Rebecca with undisguised admiration. You were really brave, he said simply. Thank you, Rebecca replied, touched by the sincerity in his voice. Andrea seemed to struggle with what to say next. I hope you don't mind us approaching you. It's just, Tyler was having trouble at school. He's smaller than the other kids, and some boys were bullying him. She glanced down at her son with pride. After we saw what you did, Tyler started standing up for himself and for other kids who were being picked on. He told his teacher he learned from watching you that sometimes you have to be brave even when you're scared. Something tightened in Rebecca's throat. Of all the attention her act had received, the media coverage, the hospital politics, the corporate maneuvering, this simple, human connection felt more meaningful than all the rest combined. I'm honored, she told Tyler, kneeling despite the twinge in her healing leg. But you know something? It takes even more courage to stand up to bullies every day than it does to react in a moment of emergency. What you're doing is braver than what I did. The boy's face lit up, and his mother mouthed a silent thank you over his head. After they parted ways, Rebecca continued her walk home, her heart full. This was the legacy she had hoped for, not foundations bearing her name or media accolades, but the quiet ripple effect of one human being showing courage and inspiring it in others. As she approached her apartment building, she noticed a small package leaning against her door. Inside was a framed photograph of the pediatric ward staff, taken at the small welcome back gathering they had held when she returned to work. Accompanying it was a note from the hospital board. In recognition of National Nurses Week, Memorial General Hospital is proud to announce the establishment of the Healthcare Heroes Grant, providing educational support to nurses seeking advanced training in emergency response and trauma care. While the initial funding comes from the Wilson Foundation, this program will be administered independently by a committee of healthcare professionals with no external influence on recipient selection. The first grants will be awarded next month. Rebecca smiled as she placed the frame on her mantel. David Wilson had found a way to express his gratitude that respected her integrity. The grant program would help many nurses without putting any single person on a pedestal. Exactly the kind of legacy she could support. Later that evening, as she settled on her couch with a cup of tea, Rebecca opened her laptop to check her email. Among the usual messages was one from Gerald Thornton, David Wilson's business rival. Her finger hovered over it uncertainly before she clicked to open it. Miss Matthews, it read. I wish to extend my sincere apology for any role my organization may have played in the difficulties you experienced following your heroic act last year. The article containing your private information was the result of overzealous action by a member of my PR team who has since been dismissed. While Mr. Wilson and I remain competitors in business, I regret that our rivalry spilled over in a way that affected an innocent third party. As a gesture of goodwill, I have made an anonymous donation to the Healthcare Heroes Grant Program. Rebecca closed the email without responding. Some communications required no answer, and sometimes silence was acknowledgement enough. The check for $500,000 that David had originally given her remained uncashed, locked in a drawer in her bedroom. After much reflection, Rebecca had decided to neither cash it nor return it, at least not yet. It represented a chapter in her life that was still being written, a complex intersection of gratitude, power, and principle that she hadn't fully resolved. What she had resolved was her relationship with her own story. The young woman who had once walked through the park unaware of what awaited her, who had acted without thought, moved by nothing more than the basic human instinct to protect a child. That woman was still who she was at her core. The spotlight had tried to transform her into something else, something larger than life, but she had refused to be redefined. Rebecca Matthews was a nurse, a friend, a woman who had done what needed doing in a moment of crisis. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. As night fell over the city, Rebecca closed her laptop and moved to the window. Below, the streets were alive with people going about their lives, each carrying their own stories, their own capacities for courage and kindness. She thought of Marcus preparing to enjoy his victory ice cream, of Tyler standing up to bullies on the playground, of Lily practicing her ballet steps for the upcoming recital. Small acts, ordinary lives, the quiet heroism of everyday existence. This was the real story, not the dramatic rescue captured on viral video, but the countless moments of human connection that followed, the ripples that continued long after the initial splash had faded from public view. Tomorrow, Rebecca would return to the hospital for another shift. She would check vitals, administer medications, offer comfort, and perhaps save lives in the less dramatic but equally important work of daily nursing. And in doing so, she would be exactly who she had always been, someone who ran toward those in need, not for recognition or reward, but because it was simply the right thing to do. In the end, that was the story she had fought to reclaim, not the narrative of the guardian angel nurse, but of Rebecca Matthews, human being, doing her best in an imperfect world. It was a smaller story perhaps, but an authentic one. And in its authenticity lay its true power. #The Guardian Angel, an unexpected hero's journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Like Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.